Well, good morning, everybody. And what a pleasure and privilege it is to be here. And thank you, Professor Guri and team, for organizing this event and welcoming me and allowing me to have the opening keynote, which, as you say, is going to be global. This is going to be a global presentation for a Hungarian, mainly Hungarian, audience. And congratulations to your association. 25 years is a long time, and it has grown, and I know something about it, but not enough, and I will learn more as I go along. So what you have heard, thank you, Professor Guri, for that introduction, including my biography, which I will elaborate on a little as we go. And I usually start with one of my favorite mottos. That's a quotation from a lady called Anais Nin, who was a Cuban-French novelist, but I think it applies to all of us, that we do not see things as they are, we see things as we are. Do you agree with that? I think it's really important. Now, again, I also admire your topic for this conference, flexibility and commitment in a transforming world. Whose idea was that? Was that you? Well, it's a very good topic. Okay, so a committee decision, but it has to come from somewhere. And it's a great topic to cause us to stop and think. And as I look at your program, I see so many specialisms in the individual presentations. 400 people, you say, register, and 200 and something. That's a lot of presentations. All could be rather fragmented, but can also be a bit unified, and that's what I will at least give a possible unifying context. So you have heard from Professor Guri already a bit of my personal history. I was born in England. This is the special accent of England. When I grew up, it was called the Queen's English. It's now the King's English. My passport says United Kingdom. It's not very united, but I actually think of myself as a global citizen. Okay, I need a passport, and I have become rather global. But as you've heard, I was a school teacher in Kenya and in Nigeria. Any of you been to those countries? Good, and the rest of you should. It changed my life and my perspective, and helped me to see things in a different light. And then, as you've heard, I worked in different universities, but I am today wearing the UNESCO tie and going to be talking about the United Nations goals. And so UNESCO, I also have a long personal history. In the 80s, I'm old enough, in China, Malta, Papua New Guinea, Sudan. As I wrote that down, I thought, wow, that's pretty diverse in terms of the cultures of those 4 countries, and it continued in Bhutan, Indonesia, Mexico, Myanmar, Thailand, Vietnam. A great privilege to be able to travel and work with people in those countries. Then I became director in Paris, as you've heard, of this institute. And if you want to know more about the institute, at the end of this session and subsequently, talk to Professor Tamas Kozma, because you know this man? He was on the governing board of IIEP in the 90s for 8 years. That was before my time as director. I had things to do with it, even from the 70s when I was a student. I made a pilgrimage to the IIEP to use their library and to talk to people. But he's also written a sort of autobiographical chapter about how he viewed the work of IIEP from a Hungarian perspective. We do not see things as they are, we see them as we are. And it's, I find, a very meaningful chapter, written and thinking about the perspectives of the 1990s when this country was undergoing such dramatic change and how internationalization helped out. It's available online. You can ask him for the details, see if he remembers them. He should. And now I am back in Hong Kong, which is my home, has been my home since 1986, where I hold a UNESCO chair. What is a UNESCO chair? It's an arrangement under the umbrella of UNESCO where I feel I can be a critical friend. I can say critical things to UNESCO because I'm from a university and I have my independence, but I want to be friendly as well. And that, I think, is one of the good things about UNESCO chairs. Now, these Sustainable Development Goals, I'm sure you've heard of them vaguely. Well, you did hear of them vaguely from Professor Gurry when he mentioned them. Launched in 2015. We will indeed talk especially about number 4 of education. But just pause and look at the others. I'll stop talking while you look at the range of them. What do you think? They're pretty much an everything collection of goals. Everything from life on land and life in water, and climate action has become so important. Responsible consumption and production, sustainable cities, inequalities. Some are generic, like inequalities. Some are more specific about life on land, etc., infrastructure, etc. So the Sustainable Development Goals are very broad and encompassing, and actually can fit a conference like this about flexibility and commitment. And what are we doing? Okay, we are education researchers, but what are we researching for? Who reads our research? Does anyone read our research? Where is it published? Is it intelligible to people who are not researchers? I think there are big questions like that that I would like to throw out for your reaction. Now, these goals were set to be achieved in 2030, so we're already halfway through. And that is causing evaluation and some people to think about commitment to those goals set 7.5 years ago, but also flexibility. Should the goals change? How should they be adapted? And within the 17 goals, there are 169 targets. When that came out, I remember somebody writing about that and said, too many. Actually, they said, remember Moses. Do you remember Moses? How many commandments? 10. 10 is enough. We can remember 10 commandments, perhaps. Actually, we forget some of those commandments too. 169 commandments, too many. Well, that's among the issues. How many commandments should we have in a set of sustainable development goals? Are we too broad and therefore not targeted, not focused? Or do we need to be broad? That itself comes a bit from the history of those goals. And so I will tell you a bit about the history. But first, the 4th goal, there it is. And within that are 7 targets, which I'm going to elaborate on. And then, as if 7 targets isn't enough, they added 3 domains, just to make things a little bit complicated. Well, that was already complicated. So where did the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, come from? What were their antecedents? They came from the EFA agenda. Do you know about that or not really? Back in 1990, 25 years ago, more than that, 33 years ago, there was a conference in Thailand in a place called Jomtien, and there they said, we've got to get our act together on education, and we'll set a target for 2000. In 2000, they evaluated, they came together in Senegal. They said, 2000, have we achieved the goals? What do you guess? Partly, yes. They said, well, actually no, but let's be nice to ourselves and say it was more than it would have been if we didn't have the goals. So they said, okay, we failed to achieve the targets, but let's set new targets for 2015. They met in 2015. What do you think they said? Did they achieve? No, sorry. But we did better than we would have done without goals, and so let's have some more goals. They met in Korea. I was in the Korea conference. I was in the background of the Senegal one, and I'm old enough even to have had some input to the 1991. But overall, that's a set of goals. Here are the 1990 goals. And they've got words which would not be very satisfactory to education researchers or to evaluators. Expand and improve. That's not very easy to quantify. Just expand. 1% is an expansion. Improve, we don't know. Ensure, that became the big one. Ensure free and compulsory education. Well, even what is free is a question. Maybe you don't have school fees, but you've got to pay for school uniforms and school books and school transport and school meals and perhaps for supplementary tutoring and other things. And compulsory education. Then, etc., etc. I won't go through them all, except to say, yes, they were well-meaning, but vague. Then in 2000, they were dovetailed with the UN goals, the Millennium Development Goals. Moses would have been happier with these ones because there were only 8. 8 commandments, not 17 turning into 169. The Jomtien, the 1991s, basically got moved into universal primary education. And people in Hungary would probably have said, boring, that's irrelevant to us. We already have universal primary education. Go and talk to Africa, go and talk to India, go and talk to all those other places. And that was a bit of a problem, because indeed, in 2015, same story, much achieved, but the problem was that education for all, including adults, had been reduced to universal primary education in the Millennium Development Goals, and was seen as irrelevant to many countries. It was not really a global thing, it was more a poor country thing. Now that's okay, I'm a UNESCO man. UNESCO works with poor countries especially, but is also global. Unlike OECD, I'm going to just point a finger at Professor Gabor Halas there. I see you as an OECD man. And OECD and UNESCO both live in Paris and have found ways to work together, which is important. But they have got different approaches to things. And because it was seen as irrelevant, now we have the SDGs, which are much broader and, I think, relevant to all countries, including Hungary, including Hong Kong, China, including anywhere else that you can think of. Within UNESCO are a series of monitoring reports. That's a picture of the recent ones. Each of them has a theme, but each of them also has a monitoring section. Now, when you're monitoring, again, I'm thinking of you as education researchers. Do you see yourself as somebody who loves numbers? Are you a quantitative person? Yes, I see some happy smiles. Or are you somebody who's frightened of numbers and wants to avoid them? I'm balancing on that, but I'm really a mixed methods man if I can, but I need the help of the quantitative people to help me to be mixed. I need your help on some of this. Well, there are themes about accountability, migration, inclusion, non-state actors, and the current one, the most recent one, is about technology, which is really such an important topic for commitment and flexibility, the flexibility part. And we'll be hearing from Ben tomorrow about AI, and others of you will be thinking about that. Within the monitoring section of this report, not the technology section, read the technology section as well, if you like. It's downloadable, but it does have 475 pages. But it's a serious document, and it's got a short version, and it's in different languages. It said the gross enrollment rates, including overage and underage, have gone up a lot. Now it's even above 100% because of overage and underage children. Lower secondary. But although the enrollment rates rose, how much were children actually learning? And one of the big issues for the SDGs and for UNESCO is, okay, we put children in school, but they don't actually learn very much. And partly they don't learn very much because of these targets. These targets have expanded the enrollment rates, and as soon as you have universal primary education, people want universal secondary education, and as soon as you've got universal secondary education, they want universal tertiary education. And that costs a lot of money. The unit costs are higher as you go up the ladder. The unit costs for primary are relatively low. The unit costs for the university sector are much bigger, so the resources get spread more thinly, and the quality gets challenged. And what UNESCO is also saying is the quality is harder to monitor. You can scold governments and you can scold politicians when children are not in school, but it's harder to scold them when the children are not learning because you don't have the indicators in the same way. So it's disguised things. And this, again, you can think about for your own particular topics in the education sector. Well, those numbers were before COVID. We know what happened. COVID hit us hard. And that's a quotation from the Global Education Monitoring Report, which is saying we have been hit hard. And again, back to flexibility. Have we got to be flexible because of COVID? Well, maybe yes. Commitment. I hope we can still be committed. But that's why it's such an interesting pair of nouns that you have chosen for your topic of the conference. Even before COVID, actually, the GEM report was saying, sorry, we actually are setting even then unrealistic goals. The GEM report is an independent organization within UNESCO. One of the challenges of UNESCO is that it's highly political. One of the great things about UNESCO is that it's highly political. We need to get the politics, and we need to get people working together. It is a body in which the different political voices can come together. But even setting rather half-baked targets like universal secondary education, sorry, said the GEM report, it won't work. we won't achieve that. We will get to 2030 and we will say the same as before. Sorry, didn't quite make it. We did better than we would have done without the goals, but sorry, let's set some new goals. Get ready for that. 2045 will be the next target, I expect. How old will you be in 2045? I shall be 100 and something. But let's see. And for us in education, let me just run through these targets. If you're running a monitoring report and trying to be specific and measure things, okay, ensure that all girls and boys, that's fairly easy, we know what's a girl and what's a boy, at least we mostly do, free, hard, equitable, and quality, leading to relevant and effective learning outcomes. This is pretty difficult, vague language. Oh, number 2, again, quality, early childhood development. What does these words mean? So that they are ready for primary education. How would we know if they're ready for primary education? It's one thing to set goals. You get committees, and committees have vague words, and then you get professors and other people like me saying, your language is too vague. Well, they will continue with the vagueness. But that's also where I'm saying that we have a role as professors and as researchers to interrogate and look at these things. 4.3, equal access. There's again, affordable and quality. Substantially increase the number of youth and adults. These words, too vague. They've got to get decent jobs. What's a decent job? Well, of course, working in this university is a decent job. But otherwise, decent jobs. Again, gender disparities, vocational training for the vulnerable, including then a list, okay, good, disabilities, indigenous people, and children in vulnerable situations. Yes, good preaching. Again, how to evaluate it. At least it puts it on the table. That's one thing they succeed. There are only 2 more. 4.6, a substantial proportion of adults achieve literacy and numeracy. Actually, let me just go back to that one. How do you measure whether someone is literate or illiterate? Have you thought about that? Have anybody researching on this? It's pretty hard. Particularly, well, in UNESCO, they were trying to get away from yes, no. There's a danger, yes, this person is literate, no, this person is not literate. And so they develop instruments to have gradations. But then in the GEM report, it's saying, pity, that collapsed. They've gone back to yes, no. And I think that's very unfortunate. And that's again where we in the education research community can help. How can we define, how can we have something a little bit more sophisticated than just yes, no, literate, illiterate? Because it's obviously a nonsense. There are obviously progressions, but they are having difficulty with it. And this one is the most controversial, difficult, qualitative, difficult to concretize, meaningful, yes. Let me pause while you read it. There's a lot of stuff in there, really a lot of stuff. Well, those are the 7 goals. Each one does have indicators. There is the set of indicators for that last one that I have mentioned, the extent to which global citizenship education and ESD are mainstreamed. I wonder what you would say about that in Hungary. If anyone is researching on that, I will be interested to chat with you Actually, back to journals, there's a special issue of a journal that I'm associated with and wants to have an article. So anybody who's writing on that, I've got a home for you if you're writing a good article. If you're writing a bad article, go somewhere else. But this is a theme which is important, and I wonder about the Hungarian and the other countries represented in this room. Then there are thematic indicators about life skills, HIV, that's interesting, that's explicit there, sexuality education. Again, they're trying hard. Look at number 3, students by age groups showing adequate understanding, adequate, related to global citizenship and sustainability. The good news is that these are on the table, and of course, if we can discuss them, then that is itself productive. That's a good thing to do. At least it makes people think about them. But they're really hard to measure. And then across these themes are new measures, which I also find interesting in the Global Education Monitoring Report. So here's a new one about greening education. Commitment and flexibility, this is the flexibility part. This is where there's a new topic, global warming. People are telling me it's warmer than usual in October in Budapest. I happen to like it, but I shouldn't be liking it. We're all worried about global warming and greening education. Digital transformation. Now again, this is where we will have in tomorrow's keynote about AI. What do you think about AI? I find it scary. ChatGPT and things like that. Those of you who are journal editors, I would be interested to hear what you think about ChatGPT in the submissions that are coming to you. And that's among the things that indeed UNESCO has been focusing on. On the one hand, there are simple baseline things like internet access. How many schools in the world have broadband? How many do not? But then there are more complicated things, and UNESCO has got a policy document about use of AI, and that's in this technology document. And that's where I think UNESCO can do things a bit differently, bigger picture than OECD. OECD is mostly the rich countries. UNESCO is global, albeit with an emphasis on the lower income countries. And UNESCO can and does do important things on that topic. Active play outdoors, that's another one which I found interesting. What they are saying is schooling becomes too intensive. This is really difficult. We hear, oh, we want to raise quality, we want to raise achievement, we want them to score high in the PISA tests, etc., etc. And then they say, oh, but the kids don't have play outdoors. What's happened to childhood? And that's in their monitoring now, a new one, again with flexibility. And even first-generation learners, I find that one interesting too. They've already said, okay, let's have gender, we're familiar with that one. We've got disability, we've got language groups. Now, what about first-generation learners, the first people in the family to go to university? That's a special target group. So there are all of these new measures being added in, which I think is good, but it makes it more complicated. And then we've got youth participation. So this is good also. So that it's not just being run by old people like me, it's hearing youth voices. After all, it's their future we're talking about, not those of us who won't be on the planet. The next GEM report, for those of you who are working on leadership, that's the topic. The GEM report, Global Education Monitoring Report, does commission background papers, I'm afraid you've missed the deadline for that. If you are working on leadership, you can't write a background paper for them anymore, but you can join the online discussion. You can go to the website and they will listen. I think they will listen. They will certainly receive your comments. There's a concept note. It's written there at the bottom. You can read the concept note, and they would benefit from you saying, well, this is a good concept note, but whatever. So maybe if you're in the sub-theme of leadership, here is a way to contribute through UNESCO to the world. Well, in all of this, I'm thinking, what are the roles of researchers? This is the Hungarian Education Research Association. So we're a room full of people who apply the label of researchers to ourselves. What are the sources of the data? Well, UNESCO does start with the ministries of education. Ministries usually have statistical units, and they will tell you how many children are in school, and they will tell you perhaps about the quality of the schools and lots of things. So UNESCO naturally starts with ministries of education, and also with other ministries for planning, for statistics, for household surveys, and so on. Then there are other international agencies like the OECD, like UNICEF, like the World Bank, like the Asian Development Bank, etc. There are NGOs of different sorts, and then there is us. Sorry, I put us last. Should I have put us first? Well, I was actually being realistic. As far as UNESCO is concerned, we come last. But we can still be important. We can still be useful. And actually, what impresses me with that Global Education Monitoring Report is how much those UNESCO people have taken the trouble to read things from people like us. That's good news. So we're not just necessarily talking into an empty space. Though a lot of the time we are, perhaps. That's again something to discuss during this conference. Well, the GEM report itself, again, I extracted another phrase which I found very interesting. The world is very different today from 2001. Why 2001? Because that's when the predecessor Global Education Monitoring Report was established. Immediately after the Millennium Development Goals, UNESCO said, okay, we will claim this job of writing a monitoring report. So they look back, and that's only 22 years ago, but the world was a different place. And they're saying it's even different from 2015, which makes the monitoring hard. Which again, I come back to your lovely topic of commitment and flexibility. There are so many of these variables. And they say, rightly, that it's not just political, social, economic, and environmental, but a lot of it is political. The politics do shape things, as we know pretty well. But they've got that sentence. It's also related to the much larger volumes of information and the diversity of channels and many more channels and the pluralism of voices. So again, let's think ahead to tomorrow with AI. I mean, it's marvelous. I'm old enough to remember making bibliographies and going to the library and finding paper copies of journals. So nice to see some paper copies of journals outside. That's refreshing to an old man like me. But equally, I love just Google Scholar and my university library, I don't actually go to the library anymore, I go online. And it's really changed things, and it's made things so much easier. But it's also made a lot of noise. And I think that we're part of the noise. I actually think there are too many journals. Every day I get an email from somebody saying, oh, I've got the journal of something, 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 with a grand title, which translates into the rubbish journal of something, 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 but I want your article because I'm going to make some money out of it. We are part of an industrialization. Again, I wonder how you feel about the industrialization of the university sector and of research. Journals are making money out of us with open access fees and with other such strategies. They rely on people like me to do refereeing free of charge. How much refereeing do you do? I hope you do some refereeing. I personally think it's a commitment that is my responsibility to be a gatekeeper. But a lot of other people say, sorry, I haven't got time for that. I'm too busy writing an article. Why should I read your article? Well, I think it's part of our responsibility. But again, maybe I can afford to do that in my age group, and you're in a different age group. And I think that the life of an education researcher has become much more hectic and much more dominated by performance indicators. Publish or perish. Does it apply here? And then it becomes the rankings. When I began my career, we didn't have these rankings, and I'm not convinced that the rankings make things better. Some of these ranked journals are pretty questionable. I personally think a good article is worth citing if it's a good article, whether it's in a good journal, so-called ranked journal, or not ranked journal. But we've been invaded by rankings, and we've been invaded by, I think, too much. So what I'm saying is good news that you've got 400 people and so many presentations in this conference, and so much diversity as I looked at the program. That can help to give us more complete and accurate pictures. It can also elaborate on themes. Literacy, yes, no, or greening education, or digital transformation. All of these things can be elaborated by people like you and me, us. New topics, including, and this is also highlighted in the GEM report, how do students learn? UNESCO's needing to catch up more on that. How do they learn? Not just putting them in the classroom, even with a computer, even with a teacher. What goes on inside the brain? But, as I say, some of this work, which I'm not going to quantify, is just noise and poor quality. I'm actually fed up with too many bad articles coming across my desk for review, or even not coming across my desk for review, because they aren't reviewed. There is a lot of noise. And that, I think, comes back to our responsibility as researchers, and I'm hoping that you have your own commitment and your own ethics to believe in what you are doing and to make the effort to have good quality, which is worth having and worth reading by UNESCO or anybody else. Along the way, I also lament a little bit this emphasis on journal articles. A journal article, what can you say in 10, 12 pages? Yes, you can say something, but books have been devalued. I still like books, even edited books. Edited books can be more than the sum of their parts. You have an edited book with a collection of things giving extra voice. So I'm a bit dismayed by the way that books are being devalued, sole-authored, or edited in favor of journal articles. But, well, it's my job on the opening keynote to be provocative, and you and I can have a fight about this during the next couple of days. So, what am I saying? Challenge to us in the university sector. Question number one, what are we researching and why? Well, I think that each of you has got your own story on why you are researching what you're researching. Perhaps you met an inspiring professor, perhaps you felt really angry about something, or perhaps you just got diverted into it. And maybe, depending on how old you are, what you're researching now is different from what you were researching 10 years ago, 20 years ago, and so on. It is the case with me to some extent. I've got some continuity and some flexibility. But what I would like to be saying is, what are we researching and why? And that's, I think, something in a multidisciplinary conference like this to talk to each other and find out, why are you researching that? What can we learn from each other in the process? And what is the quality of our work? Quantitative, qualitative, mixed. Does it have rigor? Then, how is our work disseminated and to whom? What languages? Well, I'm so glad to see lots of Hungarian books outside. Sorry, I won't be reading them, but you can. In Hong Kong, I'm actually disappointed by our universities in Hong Kong because, okay, what's the dominant language in Hong Kong? What is it? Chinese. What language are the taxpayers speaking? Chinese. What language are the university professors publishing in? English. And I think that that is disrespectful and actually fundamentally dangerous. Sooner or later, the taxpayers are going to complain. Why should we be funding you to publish in a language which we don't read? Well, in Hungary, you've got balance. Whether it's a good balance or not, I will hear from you. But I think that the languages are so important, and although I benefit from lots of people talking my mother tongue, I think it's dangerous. I think English has become too dominant, and we need to think about balances. And we also need to think about channels for dissemination and length and readability. Length. Okay, I mean, I'll come to length in a moment, but let's also think about the timing. Now, the policy-making process doesn't fit the research time frame. You may say, oh, wow, the GEM report's doing something on leadership. Quick, let me become an expert in leadership to grab it. It doesn't really work like that. But what you can be thinking about is the timing of your work, and at least to have things ready for the policymakers and the others when they need it. You won't always succeed. There are seasons when the policymakers are listening, there are seasons when they're not listening. But you do need to think about the timing. And then I'm so fed up with so many articles that I read which end with policy recommendations from people who don't know what they're talking about. They've never worked in a ministry of education. They don't know how complicated it is. They just make shallow policy recommendations. And I wish they wouldn't. If they haven't got anything serious to say, then don't say it. At least they can make a conceptual contribution. They can contribute to the other research community. But I think that there are so many needed, I mean, there's a certain arrogance. I'm a university professor. I have researched this. I'm going to tell you people in the ministry what you should be doing. Are they listening to us? No, they're not. Should they listen to us? Probably not. And anyway, the report is too long that I'm writing, and it's in complicated language, and etc. So in other words, we have got other channels, and I'm wondering how many of you write for the newspapers, how many of you write blogs, how many of you write shorter articles in addition to the academic ones. I think it's important. If you've got something to say, then say it in multiple channels, not just in one. Whatever your boss says. If your boss, well, okay, you have to negotiate with your boss as well. And it depends whether you've got tenure or not. Well, get tenure first, and then you can become a bit more flexible. But that's a generational thing. So, conclusion, and then we can have a bit of discussion. I did succeed in leaving some time, and we can have, I hope, some robust debate now and later. Professor Curie, thank you for inviting me at the beginning, and thank you for saying, Mark Bray, I want you to talk about big picture things. It's your fault. But actually, I was glad. And you can't get much bigger than the Sustainable Development Goals. They really are big. They do provide an umbrella for all of us, and if you haven't really thought about them before, then after today's session you can Google and find out more about the SDGs and the debates. And they do make a meaningful framework for making the world a better place. And I suppose all of us would like to make the world a better place. Would you like to make the world a better place? Even if actually you don't have any time to make the world, or to think about that question. That question only comes in keynotes and annual conferences. And you're too busy running the family and satisfying your boss and teaching classes and all other things. But I would like to think that we are a special subgroup in humanity. We have the privilege of being researchers, the privilege of working in universities. We do have academic freedom, at least I think. Do you have academic freedom? I think you have a lot of academic freedom. I certainly do. And perhaps more academic freedom than those people in UNESCO and more than in the Ministry of Education and so on. We have that privilege. And we can think, what am I doing to make the world a better place? But even then, we need flexibility as well as commitment. And we can help and feel useful, provided we pay attention, especially to quality and dissemination. Which brings me back to your great title. I hope that from today's session and tomorrow at this conference, you will think about commitment. Are you committed? What are you committed to? Are you flexible? What are you flexible about? And certainly, education has multiple paths. The world is transforming in complicated ways. To some extent, we just have to follow those paths. We have to be subjected to it, but we can also influence things, and we can shape, and we can make the world a better place. Thank you for listening. Now I look forward to a debate. At the end of all of this, I put my email address, and so if you want to have links to the SDGs reports, or even to Professor Kozma's autobiographical chapter, I can send you an e-copy. But thank you all very much.